The air inside the temple was thick with dust and the weight of millennia. Nathan Reed adjusted his headlamp, the beam cutting through darkness untouched by light for thousands of years. The expedition had been his idea, a career-defining gamble that had separated him from the main research team on Kepler 438b, this strange exoplanet with unexpected ruins of an ancient civilization. Final log entry, Day 42 of solo expedition. Nathan spoke into his recorder. I've penetrated what appears to be the central chamber of the temple complex. The architecture is unlike anything in our archaeological database. His voice echoed against walls adorned with intricate carvings, sinuous forms that seemed to flow like liquid, despite being etched in stone harder than diamond. The symbols pulsed with a faint bioluminescence that responded to his proximity. These markings appear to be some form of script, he continued, tracing his fingers along a particularly elaborate section. Possibly ritualistic in nature. There's a recurring motif that might represent. His fingers pressed against a symbol that suddenly yielded beneath his touch. A soft click reverberated through the chamber, followed by a low hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Nathan stepped back, his heart racing. Something's happening, he whispered into his recorder as the floor beneath him began to vibrate. The temple is activating. In the center of the chamber, a dais that Nathan had assumed was merely an altar began to shift. Sections of the floor retracted, revealing a pool of iridescent liquid that glowed with hypnotic intensity. The liquid bubbled and churned, rising upward in defiance of gravity to form a humanoid shape. Nathan watched, transfixed with equal parts terror and wonder, as the liquid solidified into the form of a woman, though "woman" was a woefully inadequate description. Her skin shimmered with a pearlescent blue hue, her eyes large and entirely black except for pinpricks of silver light that seemed to contain galaxies. Her limbs were long and graceful, crowned with delicate, translucent appendages that resembled both fingers and tentacles. Her face was hauntingly beautiful, with features that seemed to shift subtly when viewed from different angles. Who dares disturb the slumber of Vexaria? Her voice resonated directly in his mind rather than through the air. Nathan dropped to his knees, partly from shock and partly from instinct. I'm Nathan Reed, an explorer from Earth. I meant no disrespect. The being who called herself Vexaria floated down to the floor, her movements liquid and ethereal. An explorer? No. You are an intruder. A trespasser in my sacred temple. Her anger manifested as crackling energy that arced between the walls. Please, Nathan raised his hands in supplication. I didn't know this place was occupied. I'm a scientist, studying lost civilizations. Your culture must have been extraordinary. Must have been. Her laughter was like crystal shattering. You speak as if we are extinct. I am merely the first to awaken. The implications sent a chill through Nathan's body. There are more of you. My subjects will rise when I have regained my full strength. She moved closer, examining him with those unsettling cosmic eyes. But that requires energy. Energy I have been deprived of for thousands of cycles. Nathan sensed the threat in her words. What kind of energy? Devotion, she whispered, now circling him like a predator. Worship. The psychic emanations of a being who recognizes divinity. Nathan swallowed hard. You want me to worship you? It is the price of your life, Vexaria stated simply. My kind fed on the adoration of lesser species. It sustained us, empowered us. Her hand, both solid and somehow fluid, touched his cheek. You will provide this sustenance, or you will perish. The touch sent a shock wave of pleasure and pain through Nathan's body. His scientific mind raced with possibilities, psychic vampirism, energy parasitism, evolutionary adaptations unknown to human science. If I agree, you'll spare me, he asked, already knowing he had no real choice. More than spare you, Vexaria's lips curved into a smile that was both alluring and dangerous. You shall become my first devotee in this new age. A position of privilege. The way she said privilege made Nathan's pulse quicken. There was something in her alien gaze that suggested meanings beyond the obvious. I accept, he said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. Vexaria's smile widened. Then kneel before your queen, Nathan of Earth. Place your forehead upon the ground and speak the words, I offer myself in devotion to Queen Vexaria, supreme ruler of the Azuri. Nathan complied, feeling ridiculous yet terrified. As his forehead touched the cool stone floor, he repeated her words. Immediately, a warmth spread through his body, and he could feel something flowing out of him and into her. Yes, Vexaria sighed, her voice taking on new vigor. Already I grow stronger. You will learn many ways to worship me, Nathan of Earth. Some will bring pain. Others. She lifted his chin with one fluid finger. Others will bring pleasure beyond your human understanding. As Nathan looked into her cosmic eyes, he realized he had stumbled upon something far beyond archaeological discovery. He had initiated first contact with a being who viewed humans as nothing more than batteries, and he had just volunteered to be the first power source. 3 days had passed since Nathan's fateful encounter with Queen Vexaria. The temple that once felt like a scientific discovery now seemed alive, responding to its mistress's renewed presence. The walls pulsed with subtle bioluminescence that brightened whenever she drew near, as if the very structure recognized its queen. Nathan knelt before the dais where Vexaria floated, her body hovering several inches above the ground in a meditative pose. The daily ritual she had demanded was about to begin. Are you prepared to offer your devotion today? Her voice resonated in his mind, melodic yet commanding. Yes, my queen, Nathan replied, the words coming easier now than they had on the first day. He had quickly learned that resistance only led to paralyzing headaches, a gentle reminder of who held power in this arrangement. Then begin the litany of praise. Nathan took a deep breath and recited the ancient words she had taught him. They felt strange on his human tongue, syllables that seemed to fold back on themselves, sounds that existed at the edge of human perception. As he spoke, he felt the now familiar sensation of energy draining from him, a pleasant exhaustion that left him lightheaded but oddly satisfied. Vexaria's skin brightened as she absorbed his devotion, the pearlescent blue deepening to a more vibrant azure. The tiny galaxies in her eyes rotated faster, and her hair, if the undulating, gossamer filaments could be called hair, began to wave as if caught in an invisible current. Your pronunciation improves, she noted when he finished. Come closer. Nathan approached, still on his knees. Each day, the rituals had grown more elaborate, more intimate. On the first day, she had merely required words. On the second, she had demanded he place his hands upon a crystal that had painfully extracted his devotional energy. Yesterday, she had pressed her palm against his forehead, drawing directly from his mind in a process that had left him unconscious for hours afterward. Today, Vexaria said, descending fully to the ground to stand before him, we advance your training. True devotion requires more than words or thoughts. It requires surrender. She extended her hand, and Nathan hesitantly took it. Her skin felt like warm silk with a subtle current running beneath it, not unpleasant, but distinctly inhuman. She guided him to his feet. You ask yourself why I don't simply take what I need, she said, reading his thoughts as easily as he might read a book. Why this elaborate charade of worship? The question had crossed my mind, Nathan admitted. Because forced extraction yields only a fraction of the energy. Willing devotion, her fingers traced a line from his temple to his jaw, sending shivers down his spine, especially when paired with strong emotion, provide sustenance of far greater quality. Her face was inches from his now. Nathan was struck again by her alien beauty, the perfect symmetry of features that seemed to shift subtly when viewed too long, the depth in those galaxy-filled eyes. And what emotion yields the most sustenance, he asked, his voice unexpectedly hoarse. Vexaria's lips curved in a knowing smile. Can you not guess, Nathan of Earth? Before he could respond, she closed the distance between them. Her lips pressed against his, and Nathan's world exploded into sensation. The kiss was electric, sending waves of pleasure radiating through his body. It was nothing like kissing a human woman. Her lips seemed to connect directly to his nervous system, bypassing normal sensation and triggering pleasure centers in his brain he hadn't known existed. When she finally pulled away, Nathan gasped for breath, his legs barely supporting him. Passion, Vexaria whispered, her own breathing quickened. Desire. Devotion freely given in the throes of ecstasy, that is the richest sustenance. Nathan noticed changes in her appearance. Her skin now glowed with vitality, and the previously dormant markings along her arms and shoulders had begun to illuminate with a soft light. She was beautiful in an incomprehensible, dangerous way. You've done this before, he said, realizing the implications. Your kind, you fed on humans. Long ago, she acknowledged, trailing her fingers down his chest. Before we retreated from your world. Your ancestors built temples to us, offered sacrifices both mundane and intimate. Her eyes met his. We were your gods, Nathan. The scientist in him wanted to argue, to cite archaeological evidence against her claims, but he could not deny what he had experienced. Whatever energy she drew from him was real, and it was changing her. Remove your garments, she commanded suddenly. Today's devotion requires closer communion. Nathan hesitated only momentarily before complying, his rational mind warring with a growing desire he couldn't fully explain. As he undressed, Vexaria's own covering, a liquid-like material that seemed both part of and separate from her body, began to recede, revealing more of her alien form. Her body was humanoid yet different in subtle ways, proportions slightly elongated, skin mapped with illuminated patterns that responded to her emotions. She was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Now, she said, extending her arms toward him, worship your queen as humans once did. What followed transcended physical intimacy as Nathan understood it. Where human lovemaking was a joining of bodies, this was a melding of energies. Every touch between them created cascades of pleasure that seemed to amplify between them. Nathan felt his consciousness expanding, touching the edges of hers, glimpsing cosmic vastness that threatened to overwhelm his sanity. Hours later, or perhaps it was minutes, time had lost meaning, Nathan lay exhausted on the temple floor. Vexaria stood nearby, her entire body now radiant with power. The transformation was remarkable, her previously gaunt features had filled out, her movements more fluid and certain. You have pleased your queen, she said, her mental voice stronger than before. The bond grows between us. Nathan tried to respond but found himself too drained. He managed to sit up, studying her with both scientific curiosity and growing emotional confusion. He had expected to feel used, violated even, but instead felt a disturbing sense of fulfillment, as if he had found a purpose he hadn't known he was seeking. Rest now, Vexaria said, gesturing to a side chamber that hadn't been accessible before. Tomorrow, we will continue your training. There are many forms of worship you have yet to learn. As Nathan staggered to the chamber and collapsed onto the surprisingly comfortable surface within, his last coherent thought was a troubling one. He was no longer certain if he was Vexaria's prisoner or her willing acolyte. And even more disturbing, he wasn't sure which option he preferred. Nathan awoke to the soft pulsing of the temple walls, a rhythm he now recognized as being synchronized with Vexaria's presence. 2 weeks had passed since his first intimate encounter with the alien queen, and each day had brought new rituals, new forms of worship that left him increasingly drained yet strangely invigorated. He rose from the bed-like surface that had formed from the temple floor, another example of the strange, responsive technology that permeated this ancient structure. His body had changed, he was leaner now, but not weakened. If anything, he felt more alert, more alive, as if Vexaria's influence was somehow refining him even as she extracted his energy. You're awake. Her voice materialized in his mind before she appeared through the doorway. Each day, her appearance evolved further from the half-formed entity he had first awakened. Now she moved with liquid grace, her blue skin radiant with intricate patterns that shifted with her moods. Her eyes, once merely black with pinpricks of light, now contained swirling nebulae of silver and violet. I've discovered something, Nathan said, pulling on the simple garment she had provided, a robe of material similar to her own skin covering, light as air but surprisingly warm. Vexaria tilted her head with curiosity. You've been exploring. With your permission, he reminded her. She had granted him access to portions of the temple previously sealed, perhaps as reward for his devoted service, perhaps simply because she no longer viewed him as a threat. Show me, she commanded, though her tone had softened over the days. Their relationship had evolved into something neither master-slave nor equal, but something uniquely their own. Nathan led her to a chamber he had discovered the previous day while she was in what she called her regeneration trance. The room was smaller than the main chamber but densely packed with crystalline structures that seemed to function as data storage. I believe these are records, he explained, pointing to one cluster he had managed to partially activate. I've been trying to decipher the symbols based on what you've taught me of your language. Vexaria approached the crystals, her fingers caressing their surface. The crystals responded immediately, glowing brighter, information flowing through them in patterns of light. Clever human, she murmured, but there was genuine appreciation in her voice. These are indeed records, the history of my people, the Azuri. Can you show me? Nathan asked, his scientific curiosity overriding any apprehension. With a gesture, Vexaria activated the entire wall. The crystals projected three-dimensional images into the center of the room, scenes from her world, her civilization. Nathan watched, transfixed, as the history of the Azuri unfolded before him. He saw vast cities of crystalline structures, beings like Vexaria but varied in color and form, and strange technologies that seemed to blend the organic and inorganic seamlessly. We were explorers, Vexaria explained as the images shifted to show great vessels traversing space. We discovered your Earth when your kind were barely standing upright. The images showed primitive humans encountering the luminous Azuri, falling to their knees in worship. You didn't just accept their worship, Nathan realized, watching the scenes unfold. You engineered it. These structures, he pointed to temples remarkably similar to the one they occupied, you built them specifically to amplify devotional energy. Vexaria did not deny it. Energy freely given is more potent than energy taken by force. We taught your ancestors to worship us, yes, but we also gave them knowledge, protection, guidance. You made them dependent on you, Nathan said, a note of accusation creeping into his voice. Perhaps. Her eyes met his, challenging. Are you not becoming dependent on me as well, Nathan Reed? Does your body not crave our union now? Do you not find satisfaction in your service? Nathan couldn't deny it. What had begun as survival had evolved into something more complicated. The intimacy they shared was unlike anything he had experienced with another human, transcendent, almost addictive. During their unions, he could feel his consciousness expanding, touching something vast and ancient. It was terrifying and exhilarating. It's different, he insisted, though without much conviction. Is it? Vexaria moved closer, her scent enveloping him, something like ozone and exotic flowers. Or do you simply tell yourself that to preserve your human pride? Before he could answer, she placed her hand on his chest. The familiar warmth spread through him, but this time it was different. Instead of drawing energy from him, she seemed to be sharing something of herself. Images flooded his mind, memories of her world, the glory of Azuri civilization at its height, the cosmic catastrophe that had forced them into dormancy. We were dying, her voice whispered in his mind. A stellar event poisoned our home system with radiation our kind could not withstand. We scattered across the galaxy, establishing temples on compatible worlds, entering suspended animation until the worlds were ready for our return. Nathan saw her memories of Earth, the primitive humans who had indeed worshipped the Azuri as gods, the gradual retreat as human civilization advanced, the decision to abandon Earth for this distant world. You were meant to be a temporary refuge, he realized. But something went wrong. The recall signal never came, Vexaria confirmed. I slept far longer than intended. Millions of your years passed. And now, I am alone, perhaps the last of my kind. The revelation struck Nathan with unexpected force. He had been thinking of Vexaria as an alien queen, a powerful being using him for her purposes. He hadn't considered that she might be vulnerable, possibly even the last survivor of an extinct species. The moment of connection broke as she withdrew her hand. Her expression was unreadable, but something in the pattern of lights beneath her skin suggested emotional turmoil. Come, she said abruptly. It is time for today's devotion. Nathan followed her back to the main chamber, his mind processing what he had learned. As they began the now familiar ritual, something had changed between them. When they joined, the connection felt deeper, more mutual. For the first time, Nathan felt not just as a provider of energy but as a true participant in something profound. Their bodies merged in ways that defied human anatomy, her form becoming partially liquid, enveloping him, connecting them on a cellular level. The pleasure was indescribable, consciousness expanding until Nathan felt he was touching the stars themselves. When her lips found his, the kiss seemed to last an eternity, burning with an intensity that threatened to consume him entirely. In the aftermath, as they lay intertwined on the temple floor, Nathan noticed something extraordinary. The patterns on Vexaria's skin had changed again, but now similar, fainter patterns had begun to appear on his own flesh, luminous blue lines tracing along his arms and chest. "What's happening to me?" he asked, examining the markings with a mixture of scientific fascination and alarm. Vexaria traced one of the lines with her finger, her expression thoughtful. "You are changing. Becoming more attuned to me, to this place." She met his eyes. No human has served as primary devotee for this long. The effects were unanticipated. "Am I in danger?" "No," she said after a pause. "But you are becoming something other than purely human. The energy exchange works both ways, to some degree. My essence influences yours." Nathan should have been terrified, but instead found himself strangely exhilarated. The scientist in him was fascinated by the transformation, the man in him was increasingly bound to Vexaria in ways that transcended physical attraction. As she rose and moved toward her private chamber, Nathan returned to the records room, drawn by an urgent need to understand more about the Azuri. If Vexaria continued gaining strength at this rate, she would soon be fully restored, and then what? Would she still need him? Would she attempt to subjugate humanity as the Azuri had in ancient times? The crystalline records might hold answers, but Nathan realized he was running out of time to find them. More troublingly, he wasn't entirely certain whose side he was on anymore, humanity's, or the alien queen to whom he was giving not just his energy, but increasingly, his heart. 1 month into his captivity, or devotion, the line had blurred beyond recognition. Nathan stared at his reflection in a polished crystal surface. The changes were undeniable now. The luminous blue patterns that had first appeared on his skin after intimate contact with Vexaria had spread, creating intricate networks across his chest and arms. His eyes, once a mundane brown, now held flecks of silver that caught the light in unusual ways. "Admiring yourself?" Vexaria's amused voice slipped into his mind before she materialized beside him, her movement so silent he hadn't heard her approach. "Studying," Nathan corrected, though there was no hostility in his tone. "The physiological changes are accelerating." Vexaria stood behind him, her reflection joining his in the crystalline surface. The contrast between them was still stark, her fully alien beauty against his still predominantly human form, but the gap was narrowing in subtle ways. "You're evolving," she said, tracing one of the patterns on his shoulder. Her touch sent pleasant shivers through his body, a reaction that had become almost Pavlovian. "Becoming more compatible with me." Nathan turned to face her. Vexaria had transformed dramatically from the semi-formed entity he had awakened. She now stood taller, her body radiating power. The cosmic swirls in her eyes had deepened, and her once translucent hair now flowed like living silver. She was magnificent, terrible in her beauty, and Nathan could no longer deny the depth of his feelings for her. "And you," he said, studying her, "are nearly restored." "Yes." She moved toward the central chamber, and Nathan followed automatically. The temple itself responded to her growing power. Surfaces that had been dormant now glowed with energy, doorways to previously sealed areas had begun to open on their own. "Soon I will be at full capacity." The unspoken question hung between them, what then? In the central chamber, Vexaria approached the dais where Nathan had first awakened her. She pressed her palm against a previously invisible panel, and a holographic display materialized in the air. "What is this?" Nathan asked, approaching cautiously. "A map," Vexaria replied. "Of Earth." Nathan's heart rate increased. This was what he had feared, and what his research in the records room had suggested. "You're planning to return." "I am considering it." She manipulated the display, zooming in on specific regions. "The temples my kind built remain, buried beneath your cities, forgotten but intact. With sufficient energy, I could reactivate them remotely. To wake others like you," Nathan guessed. "If any survive." Her voice carried a note of longing that surprised him. "I have tried to sense them, but there is only silence. I may indeed be the last." Nathan stepped closer to the display. "And if you are? What then?" Vexaria turned to him, her cosmic eyes inscrutable. "Then I must ensure the continuation of my species through other means." "What does that mean?" Nathan asked, though he suspected he already knew. Instead of answering directly, Vexaria moved toward him with fluid grace. Her hands framed his face, and the now familiar connection between them opened, but deeper than ever before. Nathan gasped as his consciousness expanded into hers, experiencing her memories, her emotions, her alienness in ways that threatened to overwhelm his human mind. He saw himself through her eyes, not just a source of energy, but something more. A companion. Perhaps even a mate. "The changes in you," her voice echoed in his mind, "are not accidental. With each union, you become more compatible with me. More Azuri." The implication staggered him. "You're transforming me?" "We are transforming each other," she corrected, the mental connection showing him the truth of this statement. His humanity had influenced her as well, making her more empathetic, more individual, less the collective-minded entity her species had once been. Their lips met in a kiss that transcended physical sensation. Their bodies pressed together, the patterns on their skin aligning and creating circuits of energy that flowed between them. Clothing dissolved, barriers between them, both physical and mental, thinning to nothing. This union was different from those before, deeper, more complete. Nathan felt his consciousness merging with hers in a way that should have terrified him but instead felt like coming home. Their bodies joined, Vexaria's form partially liquefying to envelop him, connecting them on a cellular level. The pleasure was beyond description, beyond human capacity to experience, yet he experienced it fully, his transformed physiology allowing him to withstand what would have once destroyed his mind. In that state of ultimate connection, Nathan saw her plans with perfect clarity. Vexaria didn't just want to reawaken her kind, she wanted to create a new generation, a hybrid of Azuri and human. And Nathan was to be the progenitor. When they finally separated, Nathan collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by the experience and the revelation. Vexaria stood before him, radiant with power, her transformation complete. She was no longer the weakened entity he had awakened, she was a goddess in her full glory. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice resonating with newfound strength, "we will perform the final ritual. The complete restoration." "And then?" Nathan managed to ask. Vexaria's expression softened as she looked down at him. "And then we decide our future, together." After she left him to rest, Nathan returned to the records room, his mind still reeling from their encounter. The information he had been slowly deciphering now made terrible sense. The Azuri had not just been worshipped by ancient humans, they had been selectively breeding them, guiding human evolution to create better vessels, better energy sources, better potential mates. He pulled up one particular record he had been studying, a detailed account of the final days of Azuri presence on Earth. They hadn't left voluntarily, as Vexaria believed. They had been driven away by a coalition of human cultures who had discovered their true purpose. The temples hadn't been abandoned, they had been deliberately buried, sealed away to prevent the Azuri from returning. The humans of that ancient time had sacrificed much to free themselves from their gods. And now, unwittingly, Nathan had set in motion events that could undo all of that. As he stared at the damning evidence, Nathan was torn between loyalties. His feelings for Vexaria were real, transformed physiology or not, he had grown to care for her in ways that defied rational explanation. Yet his duty to humanity remained, a persistent voice of conscience he couldn't silence. The temple hummed around him, responding to Vexaria's movements elsewhere in the structure. Nathan knew he had until tomorrow to make his choice, to fully embrace his role as Vexaria's consort and help her reclaim Earth for the Azuri, or to find a way to stop her, potentially destroying the being he had come to love. As the bioluminescent lights pulsed around him, Nathan Reed realized the greatest discovery of his expedition wasn't the temple or even Vexaria herself, it was the terrible knowledge that devotion and betrayal could exist in the same heart, with equal conviction. The final day arrived with the temple in full awakening. Every surface glowed with power, every passageway open, the entire structure humming with expectation. Nathan had spent a sleepless night weighing his options, the conflicting loyalties tearing at his transformed being. The blue patterns across his skin now covered most of his body, pulsing in rhythm with the temple and, he suspected, with Vexaria herself. In the crystalline reflection, his eyes now contained unmistakable galaxies, smaller echoes of hers, but undeniably alien. He was neither fully human nor Azuri, but something between, a bridge between two species that had once been predator and prey. "It is time," Vexaria's voice resonated both in his mind and throughout the temple. Nathan found himself drawn to the central chamber as if pulled by gravity. She awaited him on the dais where he had first awakened her, but the transformation from that day was complete. Vexaria hovered above the floor, her body radiating power that distorted the very air around her. Her skin was now a deep, royal blue with patterns that shifted like constellations. Her hair flowed around her like living silver, defying physical laws, and her eyes contained universes. "You've come to a decision," she stated, reading his emotional state with ease. "I feel your conflict." Nathan approached the dais, each step measured. "I've learned more about your kind's history on Earth." "The records are incomplete," she replied dismissively. "Corrupted by time." "Not all of them." Nathan's voice was steady despite his inner turmoil. "I know the Azuri didn't leave Earth voluntarily. Humanity rose against you." Vexaria's expression darkened, the patterns beneath her skin accelerating. Primitive superstition. Fear of what they couldn't understand. Or recognition of what you truly intended. Nathan climbed the steps of the dais, standing before her. Not guidance. Not protection. Cultivation. You were breeding us, changing us to serve your purposes. We were elevating you, Vexaria countered, but there was a flicker of acknowledgement in her cosmic eyes. Guiding your evolution toward something greater. Without our consent. Does the clay consent to the potter's hands? She reached out, tracing the luminous patterns on his face. Look at what you've become in merely a month of devotion. Imagine what humanity could achieve under Azuri guidance over generations. Her touch still sent waves of pleasure through him, the connection between them undeniable. Nathan fought to maintain his focus. At what cost, he asked. Our autonomy? Our identity? Our future as our own species? Such limited thinking. Vexaria's voice carried both disappointment and affection. This is why you need us. Why you've always needed us. She gestured, and the temple responded. The floor of the dais opened, revealing the pool of iridescent liquid from which she had first emerged. But now it glowed with blinding intensity, churning with barely contained power. The final ritual requires total devotion, she explained. Complete surrender. You must enter the pool willingly, merge your essence with mine completely. Her eyes held his. Once done, the transformation will be irreversible. You will be my consort for eternity, Nathan Reed. Neither human nor Azuri, but the first of a new lineage. Nathan looked from the pool to Vexaria, his heart racing. The scientist in him was fascinated by the possibility, the man in him drawn to her with undeniable longing. Yet something else, perhaps the last vestige of his humanity, resisted. And Earth? He asked quietly. We will return together, she said, extending her hand to him. Reawaken the temples. Search for any of my kind who might still slumber. And if none remain. Her expression softened. Then we will begin anew. Our children will inherit both worlds. The temptation was overwhelming. In her presence, his transformed body yearned to complete the process, to join with her fully. The month of intimate connection had created bonds that transcended physical attraction. He understood her loneliness, her fear of being the last of her kind, her genuine belief that the Azuri had been benefactors to humanity. Yet he also understood now why humans had rebelled. The price of Azuri guidance was too high, the slow erasure of human potential, human choice, human destiny. I love you, he said simply, the word surprising them both. Or whatever approximation of love is possible between our kinds. What I feel for you is real. Vexaria's expression softened further. Then join with me. Complete the ritual. Nathan stepped closer to the pool, its energy calling to the transformed parts of him. He could feel Vexaria's anticipation, her genuine desire for him to join her. There's another way, he said, turning back to her. One where neither of us has to lose what we are. Explain. Stay here, Nathan proposed. Build a new Azuri civilization on this world. I'll remain with you, not as a servant or worshipper, but as an equal partner. We'll seek out others of your kind who might be scattered across the galaxy, but we leave Earth to its own evolution. Vexaria's eyes narrowed. You would deny your own species the guidance of the Azuri? I would preserve their right to find their own path. Nathan took her hands in his. As I choose mine. The temple trembled around them, responding to Vexaria's conflicting emotions. For a moment, Nathan feared he had miscalculated, that her desire for restoration of Azuri dominance would override whatever feelings she had developed for him. Then, with surprising gentleness, she drew him closer. You offer an alternative I had not considered. Azuri have always been collectively minded, the species above the individual. But my long isolation has changed me. Her fingers traced the patterns on his skin. As you have changed me. Is it possible? Nathan asked. Can we find a middle path? Instead of answering with words, Vexaria drew him into a kiss that opened the connection between them completely. In that moment of total vulnerability, Nathan saw the truth of her, not just the queen, the goddess, but the being beneath. Her loneliness, her fear, her growing affection for him that had become something perilously close to love. And she saw him in equal measure, his scientific curiosity, his internal conflicts, his genuine feelings for her despite knowing what she was and what she had intended. When they parted, Vexaria's expression had transformed. "The final ritual can be modified," she said thoughtfully. "Instead of complete merging, a balanced union. You would retain more of your humanity, I would retain my Azuri nature. But the bond would be permanent." "A true partnership," Nathan suggested. "Something new in the history of both our species." She gestured to the pool, which calmed at her command, its blinding light softening to a gentle glow. "It will not be easy. We are different in ways that go beyond physiology, our perceptions of time, of purpose, of existence itself." "Nothing worthwhile is easy," Nathan said, the cliché somehow appropriate for this most unprecedented of situations. Vexaria smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her alien features into something he found achingly beautiful. "Then let us rewrite the ending of our species' histories." Together, they entered the pool. The liquid embraced them, its energy surging around their joined bodies. As they sank beneath the surface, their physical forms temporarily dissolving into the shared essence, Nathan experienced Vexaria completely, and she him. The intimacy of their previous unions paled in comparison to this total communion, bodies and minds merged yet distinct, like binary stars orbiting a common center. They made love in that state of transcendent union, their consciousnesses intertwined as intimately as their bodies. In that sacred moment, boundaries between them blurred but did not vanish, human and Azuri, man and woman, mortal and near-immortal, finding harmony in their differences rather than erasing them. When they finally emerged from the pool, both were changed. Nathan's transformation had progressed but stabilized, the luminous patterns permanent now but not overwhelming his human appearance. Vexaria seemed softer somehow, her cosmic power tempered with something more grounded, more individual. "What happens now?" Nathan asked as they stood together on the dais, their hands still joined. Vexaria looked out at the temple, now fully awakened but serving a new purpose. "Now we build something that has never existed before. Not an Azuri empire, not a human colony, but a true meeting of equals." Her eyes met his. "We will send signals to the stars, seeking others of my kind who might have survived. And we will create children who carry the best of both our species." "And Earth?" Nathan asked, needing the reassurance. "Will continue unaware of us, for now." Vexaria's expression grew thoughtful. "Perhaps, generations from now, when both our peoples are ready, a reunion might be possible. But that is a decision for our descendants, not for us." As they stood together in the ancient temple and now humming with new purpose, Nathan Reed, explorer, scientist, and now something more, realized he had discovered something far beyond archaeological significance. He had found a new beginning, not just for himself and Vexaria, but potentially for two species that had once been locked in a cycle of worship and domination. The death that had begun with fear and survival had transformed into something neither of them could have anticipated, a bond of choice, of respect, of love in its most cosmic sense. Queen and devotee had become partners in creation, writing a new story among the stars.